In my first conversation with Mpho Makwana, I asked him to reflect on the concept of a leadership legacy. We think of a legacy as how you want to be remembered as a leader. What impact or difference will you have made when you look back on your career? I ask him whether he agrees with the assertion that the true mark of a leader is measured by the lives that leader touches. Does he agree that leadership starts with us, and that the shadow we cast as leaders is a reflection of our level of influence within our teams and organizations? Is it a requirement for leaders of this new frontier to consider whether the imprint of their words and actions is as clear and powerful as they need it to be? And Paul, it's so nice to be sitting with you here today. And I have a mixture of feelings. First of all, I'm very privileged to have this opportunity to sit with you and have this conversation. And the privilege comes from, when I was preparing for today, I was thinking about the journey that you and I have been through. And can you believe that it's been over 20 years?
Not more?
It's actually a little bit more. But 20 years that I can call you friend and mentor, and I really am privileged to be able to say that. I'm also excited. I'm excited about this opportunity. We're starting a new project, and it's a project that I know has great meaning for you. It's something that's very meaningful to me, where we're going to be exploring together the concepts around leadership and why leadership matters, particularly in the world that we find ourselves in now. And when I was preparing for today, I was thinking about the journey that we've been on. And it made me think of this concept of walking a journey. And as a leader, you have that opportunity at any time to pause and to look over your shoulder and to consider, what are the footprints that you're leaving behind as you walk this journey? And so it talks to this concept of legacy. I would love to hear from you what legacy means for you, and why is it important to you?
You know, the notion of legacy for me starts with, I guess, who I am as a leader of, let's say, African heritage.
Okay.
In an African context, let's maybe narrow it down to a Southern African context, as a matter of identity.
Okay.
When you're born, you are informed of your totem. That would be equivalent to a family crest. In generationally, also, I'm a Gen X.
Okay.
And raised by a silent generation father and mother who's early stage baby boomer. I had the privilege of knowing both my GI grandparents.
Yeah.
So in an African context, your paternal grandmother normally has that duty of inculcating in you your sense of heritage and identity, and how that should be borne in mind in everything you do in terms of legacy. So my family crest totem is the lion.
Okay.
And so since I developed consciousness and ability to speak and comprehend what's happening around me, I grew up knowing that I carry the spirit of the lion with me. The next thing that you get inculcated in you is the clan praise names, because they tend to guide you along the way. So our clan, any person who's a Makwana chances are comes from the east, the valleys of Lydenburg and surroundings. That's where most Makwana people come from.
Okay.
So we're people of the east. And in my native language of North Sotho, we're called Baroka in plural. In singular, it's a Moroka. And along the many lines of our family praise names, there's a line that says, when you see a Moroka, you must, in the direct translation, you must cherry pick, because a Moroka is a valuable asset. So you, in my family background, you were raised to know that you carry this responsibility. Later on, much later on, I think I was late 20s, early 30s, in between the interactions I had with you when you were at Gibbs.
Yeah.
There's a gentleman I met who was he passed on a few years ago. He was in change management in OD at Nedbank. We used to interact and network a lot. At that point, I never even thought I'd get involved with Nedbank someday.
Okay. And
he introduced me to a colleague of his. They did work together. I think I did one assignment with them in an organization when I still had a consulting firm. In fact, one of the points of interaction in our journey was when you were an academic at Gibbs, and I ran my consulting firm from Gibbs.
Yes.
In the late 90s, 1999, early 2000. They introduced me to Linda Tucker,
yes,
who wrote the book, The White Lines of Timbabati. That book felt like it was written about my family, because of the lion spirit. But she talks in that book about how every place of significance, whether it's Trafalgar Court, whether it's the Union Buildings, whether it's some royal courthouse, at the courtyard you will find a statuette of a lion standing guard. And her description of lions as custodians of humanity dovetailed very well with what my paternal grandmother used to tell me about being a lion.
Yeah.
As a protector. And so my life purpose linked to my legacy, sense of legacy, is about being a trusted counselor to world-class leaders, especially world-class leaders who seek to leave the world better than they found it. And so as a chair of a board, as a non-executive director, as a advisor, as and when I do executive coaching or advisory work, I fulfill that role of carrying the lion spirit that stands guard.
I love that.
And supports or even protects leaders in the jungle, I suppose, within which they have to lead. So for me, the notion of legacy goes that deep. It's about knowing that you carry a family name.
Yeah.
You carry a totem, and in the context of being a Moroka, you have to ensure that both my grandmothers used to say, we don't want that when they say, do you know Mpomakwana? And they say, not that silly one, or not that delinquent one. They should say, oh, you're that Mpomakwana who does this and this for people. And so that, in this sense, it's almost like a living legacy.
Yes.
Because these notions help you serve as a compass navigating every step. Certainly it can be burdensome because you then, and the reason it's burdensome is because on my mother's side, there's a bit of a royal lineage heritage.
Okay.
On my paternal side, my father's mother also comes from another royal house. And so both families tie down to a third royal house. So even though we're not direct in line for any chieftaincy,
Okay.
we are part of the cobweb of those three royal families. And so then there's the added duty of ensuring that you don't bring disrepute to your family name or those related houses' identities. Then, lastly, I think the burden comes from the fact that one is a firstborn.
Yeah.
I think you and I once spoke about the book, the Birth Order
Yes.
book, which talks about how people's character gets shaped relative to their birth order.
Yes.
When you're a firstborn, if you're a male, you become like the deputy dad.
You have that
If
responsibility.
you're female, you become like the deputy mom. And I've certainly had my fair share of being deputy dad in the family, looking after my siblings and contributing in various forms and shapes in my own family.
It's a great responsibility. How do you manage that responsibility?
It comes naturally. As I say, generationally, my generation had the benefit that grandparents
Yes.
had certain roles that they knew they had to fulfill through folklore, like I've just shared with you about the family totem, through just grooming, and I guess informal mentoring. The other areas, there's been also a huge element of role modeling.
Yes.
My maternal grandfather and my paternal grandfather had certain achievements that made them firsts among their generation in different contexts. My paternal grandfather grew up on a farm, went and worked in the asbestos mines in the Belfast, Mpumalanga area.
Okay.
And had just an unwavering entrepreneurial spirit.
Fantastic.
On the farm area where they lived in the valleys of Lydenburg, he became the first person among his community to own a store, which was at that time pre-1948 apartheid declaration. It was kind of an unheard of
That's
phenomenon.
significant.
For someone, a son of a farmer, a son of peasants, a mine worker, just to think, I'm going to set up shop here in the farm and have a general store that people can get supplies from. My maternal grandfather was one of the first black reverends in the Dutch Reformed Church. At that time, under apartheid, or again, just pre-legislated apartheid, but segregation already existed. You had three versions of the Dutch Reformed Church. You had the main church, which was called NG Kerk, and then the second part was NG Kerk Sendeling, which is like NG Kerk Missionary, that was for the colored community. And then you had the NG Kerk Sendeling in Africa, which was for black people. But at synods, they all met together as reverends. Because of the Afrikaner Presbyterian heritage, they were called Domineer.
Okay.
And Domineer, loosely translated English, means one who presides over souls.
Okay.
But the colored reverends and the black reverends, until about early 60s, they could not be called Domineer, because they were seen as, lesser beings, and therefore they couldn't be deemed to be capable of being domineers. And so as he progressed through his career until his retirement around 1982-83, he also became the first black domineer emeritus.
Okay.
Having been the equivalent of the head of the church would be called moderator, or moderator as they had it in Afrikaans. So their children, my father and my uncles, were under pressure to achieve certain things. So both parents had this philosophy that at that time you must go beyond JC.
Yes.
Standard 8 was junior certificate JC. And so you at least had to have a matric to be deemed to be well set for a good career. Later, both parents said to them, no, there's this thing now called a university degree. You've got to have a university degree. And so they role modeled these things for us in that sense. For instance, on my mother's side, there were 8 children. My mother's also the firstborn. In that family, all 8 had a university degree. Something not quite common in the black community in the 70s and 80s. On my paternal side, my father was the only one that could go as far as a diploma. There used to be technical SA.
Yes, yes.
He got a diploma with technical SA in public finance. And so all of them then made sure that their children went to school. And so among my cousins, among my siblings, you will find lots of lawyers, doctors, specialists like ophthalmologists. There's a homeopath specialist in the family. There's all manner of specialization. And so our children now are just finding that it is just the natural thing.
Yes.
To aspire to achieve something or accomplish something.
Because of that role modeling.
So you don't therefore feel you're carrying a burden. You're just following a path of life.
So you spoke about the totem, and I mean those qualities of the lion in engaging and having the opportunity to know you for these 20 odd years. Those values and qualities are so much who you are. And yet when you're talking now about this heritage and the story, I've got another image in my mind of a tree. It's, as you're talking about each of these family members that have had such a positive influence on your life, and how they have instilled in you. It's kind of like the roots that have taken hold and allowed an individual to emerge from that, where you've been able to draw on those qualities and those values and make it an integral part of you, and then pass it on to your children. And that's, for me, is such, it talks to this concept of legacy, of what has come before is moving through me to someone else. Do you think that there's a place in the world that we find ourselves in now that is so complex and so chaotic, for individuals to take the opportunity to pause and reflect and to think, where have I come from, and the path that I've walked, and the influence that has had on me?
There certainly is, because we all come from different starting points. In our context, the heritage I've just shared with you is probably a minority. There's a handful of families you can count that perhaps may have had this type of family history. If you look back to the 18th, 16th century, you will find that you probably can count a few families that managed to create this cross-generational transference of values. There will be some from political dynasties, there will be some from business and so forth. But if you then overlay the kaleidoscope of race into it, you will also find that even in the English, Afrikaner and other communities, you'll find pockets of those heritages. But the key thing for us, if I stick to my family and the tentacles and the roots in there, we were also conscientized to not be too proud.
Okay.
So at primary school, I went barefoot to
Okay.
school like any other child, regardless of perhaps the fact that in my home, from age 3, because my parents built our home ground up, I came from a home that had electricity and running water, but we still had an outside latrine because it was in a village. Later we did septic tanks and so on. But I knew very well that sitting in that sub A and substandard B and standard 1 class, I had to be like any other child.
Okay.
Even though some may have picked on me and said, oh yeah, you a cheese boy and that sort of thing, but I had to fit in and be part of that community. When I went to boarding school, I was incognito for my first year in high school.
Okay.
Then, well, it so happened that at the end of that year in 1982, December, that's when my grandfather turned 70 and actually decided to retire.
Okay.
And TV1 at that time, there was TV1, TV2, TV2 at that time, decided to come and broadcast his retirement sermon.
Okay.
And so as a family, we had to all stand in front of the pulpit. And that was the first time, I guess, I had a television appearance. And when I got to school the following year for Standard 7, everybody said, oh, we're still on TV. And that's the only time they got to know, perhaps, that I was from maybe a prominent family.
Okay.
But still, throughout, I became an activist like many young South Africans that got politically active because of exactly that sense of consciousness that you've got to be part of the solution. There are other families that, if we recollect that South Africa has had this migrant working system where fathers were absent from their homes.
Yeah.
And so there are some families where you'll find that they've lived through, there's a leadership model that talks about absent fathers and strong mothers and the role they play in grooming how one becomes a leader. There are people that may have not had the same advantages, purely not in economic terms, but purely in terms of a sense of groundedness in values. Yeah. When you meet in the economy, in the social arena, that consciousness must still carry through. You must still, where you are privileged to be a responsible professional, a manager, or as in my case, having grown up in the corporate sector, you then conscientiously remember that you have to lift others as you rise. But there are those that have not been that fortunate, where they have not benefited from parents that have been married for decades. Instead, they've come from families where marriages broke down, God forbid, where there's been abusive relationships, and therefore their own sense of growth has been different. But in the end, to thrive as an individual in the context you've sketched the question, ultimately it is the one that knows that your circumstances don't define you.
Yes.
That then finds scope to grow and thrive. And so in this sphere of then, whether it's in this context we're talking about as friends and partners in equilibrium, or in other contexts of change facilitation, the duty then is to recognize that spark in people
Exactly.
and help bring it out.
Exactly.
And help be not necessarily the one who tells the way, but the catalyst that helps people navigate, the compass that helps people navigate that direction.
If your paternal grandmother was sitting here, what would she say to you today?
She was an industrious person. All she knew, she lived for a very short while, for 60 years. All she knew was how to live off the land. So from her, I learned about harvesting sorghum, about plowing fields, and that. I think firstly I would hope she would take pride in how I've carried the lion spirit forward. She herself, her family totem was a lion, and she came from the Petla family tree and got married into the Makwana family tree, who are also lions. So she carried, if you like, the double dose.
The pride is growing.
Lion spirit. I would hope that she would feel that I carried it gracefully. One of the things she used to say to me very early in life, and I don't know what in her crystal ball she saw. You know, in our language, when your grandmother speaks to you, she'll call you Manangwanak, a child of my child. She used to say to me, if I direct translate, she would say, child of my child, I want you to know something. Whatever you become in life, you must always endeavor to ensure that in your journey of success, you don't hurt people. And then she would punctuate and say, especially the indigent and the less privileged. And she would say to me, you must know that when they shed tears, their tears go directly into God's both palms. And what she meant by that is that when you are slightly privileged and you, I guess, beat down the underprivileged and the downtrodden, all you can ever attract into your life is bad luck. Because whatever hurt that they may carry because of your deeds will almost, I guess, come back at you twofold, threefold, with the wrath of whoever listens to their plea. And so I would hope she would feel that I've lived up to that as a compassionate, caring human being, firstly. And I would hope that in my journey as someone that has led others, that I've endeavored to make sure that if I can't help them, at least I didn't hurt them.
Paul, thank you. From your paternal grandmother through from you, thank you so much for that wisdom and that insight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.